As usual, we'll be taking just a few moments to let people pop into the Zoom meeting as they sign in. And then we'll get started. Thank you. All right, we have some folks signed in, or no one join in. Okay, then I call this meeting, this board workshop of the South Louis School Board to order. We will begin with our land acknowledgement. Marnie.
Thank you, Director Williford. I invite community members to visit our website to read the full written land acknowledgement. I'm just going to improvise because I feel more comfortable making this acknowledgement from the heart rather than the head, or I should say, and from the head, because all of my parts are here on tribal land. We acknowledge that we live, gather, and work on the lands of the Coast Salish and Snohomish peoples, the tribes collectively affiliated with the Tulalip tribes, the speakers of the Lushootseed language family. These lands are sacred, have been sacred in their families for millennia, and we continue to honor our relationships with and our co-stewardship of this land and its people. If you're interested in tribal community events, our neighbors up in Coupeville are hosting a program this coming Saturday. I believe it is a carving journey, a totem that has been created in solidarity with an Apache Nation land sovereignty effort. And it is a journey that is being launched out of Coupeville. And so if you're interested in learning more about that story, I read it in one of our local publications. I believe it was the South Whidbey Record or the Whidbey News Times. I encourage you to look for that if you're curious about some of the activities that some of our Indigenous neighbors are engaged in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director Jackson. As you can see, I don't have my computer in front of me. I'm having some computer problems. If you do have a comment and you're on the Zoom, if you would put your name and location in the Q&A, and Director Greenherron will cue you when we're ready for your comment. Please do put in a complete comment, so because we may have moved past the point you were discussing and we'd like to know what it was, what the context was for that comment. We're going to start with student board member discussion. We have our student board members here, and so we want to talk about some things that we've done well, some things that we can improve on, some things we can look at going ahead. There's some discussion of how to select not Audrey's replacement this year, but Katya's replacement next year. And then we'll move on to policy. So I would love to bring in everyone here to talk about what's been great and what further opportunities we have about having student representatives. I'd love to, if folks could do a 2 up and 1 down, or 2 up and 1 forward, actually. Let's change that around. 2 things that have been great, 2 things that have worked well, whatever it is, and 1 thing that we can do better or start to improve on going forward. I'll start just since I sprung this format on everyone, so people have time to think about it. I think that we have two very excellent student representatives, and they've done a great job of putting a face on this district to the larger, not just school network in Washington, but also to our legislators. And I think that's one thing that they have done excellently, and that I think that we have done well in supporting them to do. I think that they have done a fantastic job of reaching out beyond their own school to get information about how not just high schoolers are doing, but all of the schools. And I think that we can improve upon communication from the board to the student body going forward. I'm not going to just go around. I'd like to popcorn it. Just if you've got thoughts, speak up, because I know that some people take a little longer to formulate their thoughts. Some people have them right away.
I think two things that we're doing well is the fact that we have 2 student reps and that we have advisory votes. A lot of the boards that we've talked to at the conferences we've gone to have no idea what an advisory vote is. So that's a really cool thing that we have. And I think just the fact that we're able to have such an open conversation with you guys and are invited into board meetings and board workshops and have a really welcoming environment is also something we're doing really well. And I think in the future, I'd like to see both positions being voted for by the student body. So it's more of the students voting for who's representing them instead of one being voted and one being selected.
If any of the administrators also have, or community members also have thoughts on this, you're welcome to join in. I'm not going to call on anyone though.
What's the, how do you want to sort of dialogue? You want to let all of the folks have their 2 and 1 and then dialogue after that? Okay, thanks.
My 2 ups. One is the reps themselves. Just been amazing working with the 2 of them. I love how they have 2-way communication, both from the students to us and from board and district happenings back to the student body, and also blazing a trail for more student voice, not just here in our district, but at the state and national level as well. And then also maybe the flip side of that coin is also the relations between the voting members and the student reps, both between the advisory votes and just the presentations that you give to give us a way to encapsulate everything that's going on that you're seeing and learning in the format of the student reports. It's been very helpful. And then going forward, similar to what Katja said, I think we can evolve the selection process to involve more student voice in the selection/appointment/election process itself.
Something I'd like to point out is just the general topic of elevating student voice, not necessarily by having the positions, but through what the position does, rather it be advocating in our district or going on to the state or federal level to represent South Whidbey through the students and through student voice. And I think that's something our district has done very well. And by giving a lot of opportunities for student reps to attend these conferences and to attend these different events, it not only allows us to grow and learn more about how a school board operates, but also allows us to advocate on behalf of our district. Another thing I think our district has done well with student reps is I truly believe that we have paved the way for student reps in Washington, especially through the advisory vote. That's something Katya and I have almost brought up in every single time we're talking about our position, because it's a lot of things other student reps haven't even heard of. And it's a huge part of our position, and being able to actually, state yay or nay, and just be able to resemble, although we don't have an official vote, be able to resemble the same input an elected board member would have. I guess 2 things that could be improved upon is, I believe both of these positions, eventually the election process could be more democratic, to involve more of the student body and to have it be a true representation of the student body through elections. Another thing I think could be developed upon is kind of forming ways to ensure that student reps don't feel burnt out. Because as a 2-year student on my second term, I can definitely feel, like it takes a lot of time, and I find so much passion. I find it to be so rewarding. But I also can feel like it can be a lot of work. And I think for me, the passion and how rewarding it feels really keeps me going and wanting to, attend meetings and wanting me to go out and get student input. But I think for, a lot of high school students, it's difficult. It's difficult to not feel overwhelmed with schoolwork and with the work of the board. So I think it's really important to find ways to support student reps and just to ensure that their mental health is supported as well.
I would say my 2 ups. One is just the leadership that you show with younger kiddos. Just really being involved in what the other schools are doing and being representative for every school and every kid and every school in the district, and not just the high school. I think that's really valuable and important. And I also think that, having the student voice, +1 on all the student voice stuff and the ability for you all to really represent what students want, where students are going, and being a voice for all those folks. I would say an opportunity that we have is, at all the schools, and we heard in the student improvement plans that kids are really jazzed about leadership and about clubs and about being involved and being motivated. And our administrators and our staffs are super excited about getting all kinds of different interests covered, so that every kid has a place where they can belong and a trusted adult. How do we keep that motivation moving? And how do we keep those kids who are engaged now in 3rd and 4th grade? How do we keep them engaged in the future? And how do we continue? How do those kids become mentors then for younger kids as they age up into the grades?
Yeah, I really appreciate what you share around just the risk of burnout and the amount of energy, time, and dedication that this service takes. So one of my ups is just the incredible commitment that you two have both demonstrated, not just that you're great at what you do, but you also give a lot of yourselves to do it. And that means like showing up with a strong informed opinion that includes incorporated advice from the student body rather than just kind of going along with whatever the adults in the room feel like moving forward. I really appreciate that you're both gritty and you speak your wise positions well, even when they aren't necessarily the consensus in the room. I also really admire the way you've engaged beyond our district as advocates among your peers and as advocates to our legislators. So thank you. And yeah, if there's an opportunity, I would say just to formalize the what's in it for you and make sure that you are being rewarded as much as you are giving to us. And whether that means clarifying and expanding how you can earn credit or, volunteer service hours and so on through what you do here. I just want to make sure that this is adding to your academic experience and not detracting from it. Thank you.
I think I would echo Director Greenherron's comment about just your presence both across the state and nationally, that has really been awesome to watch. And it's been really nice to see this position grow to a place where that's possible. And I think, Audrey, you were definitely at the helm of that shift, and it's been nice to see. Another up I would have is just how much more voice we have present at the table from students in terms of, I think of a couple months back when we made the decision about the North Campus, and just knowing that we had student voice present in that decision was really awesome. I think the opportunity, I would second Marnie with wanting to look at how do we provide credit hours or provide volunteer hours or something along those lines so that we can capture the amount of work that this position does take.
Is there anyone else here who wants to chime in?
I certainly appreciate all the work that's gone on, especially by our 2 students. It's my 2 ups are that getting to know them has been a real plus. And Audrey said something when we were on our trip to Olympia, that it's the best thing she ever did. And that just made me so happy. And we also talked about what could we do to make it even more doable. So it's going to require some conversation with high school principal and figuring out what the possibilities are for students. So I'm excited about that opportunity. Certainly getting more, I'm going to give you my concern. My concern about having them both elected is the same concern I had the last time we talked about it. And I want to make sure that elected still gives every opportunity to those students who may not be popular. And that worries me. So how do we ensure that we can get all student voices to the table? I've had the pleasure of working with a superintendent's advisory team of students who may not be the most popular, but certainly are very passionate. And so I just want to make sure we keep it open for all students. That would be my only caution. But I think the opportunity I have gained from the presence of students on the board has been tremendous.
Yeah, I'd like to add one more. I certainly support everything you guys have done, and you've been amazing. But I also think we ought to mention the board. The fact that they're open and willing to encourage student voice is amazing, because I've seen other boards that wouldn't have done that. And so I think that's been a very positive thing for the adults in the room to really want to hear what our students have to say and support them in the roles. And, you know, and going forward, how do we get students of this quality at this table again? You know, we have been so fortunate. We really have.
I just wanted to thank you both again for the, when our elementary students were here and you came down and spoke with them, it really had an impact on them. I've had a number of students say to me, I'm gonna keep on being a leader. And that's so inspiring to them and to us. So thank you. Just would love more opportunities for you to connect with the younger children that way.
I'm gonna start off with my concern. When do you sleep? It's a huge responsibility that you're taking on, and both of you, I know, are stellar students taking hard classes and involved with multiple sports activities, clubs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I see the effort and the time, the commitment, and that's something I really appreciate. Also, I've always been, I never have a worry. I think you're both great, accurate representation of what's going on at the high school, all the activities and things that are taking place. And I think that's really important to hear from our students, to our community about all the great things that are happening at our school. And so I really appreciate that too. And I also want to say that I work with people for a living. And you two are beyond your years in maturity and wisdom and professionalism, and coming from students, that's something great to see. Thank you both.
Okay, then let's turn this into a more freewheeling discussion. Thank you all for responding with the 2 ups and 1 forward. Or whatever form the commentary came in. It seems like there are a couple of things that we can, a couple of topics that we can go through. One more pressing, I believe, to the students, and several more that we can talk about through there. I'd suggest method of election or method of choice, how to avoid burnout, and how to reward participation. Anything else that folks would like to add to the docket to talk about?
I guess to be more a minor thing, but kind of developing a sort of way to gain feedback, whether it be through surveys. Because I know last year the other student rep and I sent out a survey and some things with it fell through. So just developing like kind of like a centralized way to send surveys continuously, whether address certain things on the agenda. Because I think that could also contribute to the burnout if there's just like a simple way to gain feedback where you can get the entire student body's opinion.
I think I could help on that. We can use Google survey. And if you want to come up with a list of questions, then we can have our students in advisory fill those out. And then you can get all the feedback. That might be an easy avenue.
Okay. Let's start with method of choice. I want to start this discussion by saying the board will be selecting the student rep to replace Audrey this year because of timing issues. Just start there. So we're looking in the future. Both of the student reps have expressed and our previous student rep have expressed a very strong desire to have direct selection from the students. Numerous of the board members, myself included, have mentioned a concern about that, about not just selecting popular students. And I want to recognize my own bias here. I'm coming from when I was in school, mumbly years ago, when an election like that would have been the popular students. We constantly talk about when we go to these schools and see the students interacting with one another, how different they are from us when we were in school. That's something that is always striking to me. So I want to recognize that my resistance to this idea is my own bias. And I do want to listen to the experts in the room about how students would select fellow students. I think that we have a good opportunity here to see who comes forward for a selection process by the board, and then next year to see how a student is selected by their peers, and see if there's a difference in who comes forward and who is selected. Thoughts on this?
Agreed. And I want to make a distinction between what I'm hearing you say and what I heard Dr. Moshe say a few minutes ago, because correct me if I'm wrong, your concern was less about the popularity contest thing. And I agree with Director Williford about that. Like, things have changed and we can't necessarily assume that's how it would go. But Dr. Moshe's concern seemed more about like equity in the sense that some students have what it takes to campaign, even if their campaign is on the merits of them as a candidate and not just how cool they are or like whatever's popular these days. So let's just, for the sake of argument, let's assume it won't be a popularity contest. A full democratic election of the where the student body, each member gets one vote, that will still trend towards candidates who have the means, the time to campaign and are articulate to talk about the issues that they are thinking in their head, to get that out into words or onto paper. And it sounds like what Dr. Moshe is saying is like there's some students who don't fit that mold, yet they still have great things to bring when they're in the advisory committee. So my challenge or charge to this group is like, how can we find a way that both involves more student voice in the selection and also helps us pick someone who isn't just good at the things that make someone good at a campaign?
One of the pieces that keeps coming to mind is if we go back 2 years ago to when Dr. Tammy Campbell came to work with our leadership team, what she talked about was not just looking at who does school work for, but to look at the gap and to look at who does school not work for. And it is a fair assessment that school is working pretty well for both of you. And students who tend to run for these leadership positions, who will campaign, who will do those things, school works for them. That's why they're invested in being there. If we really want to focus on closing the gaps, we need to hear from the kids and the students that school does not work for and who are struggling. And that is part of why we have the setup that we do, where we have one person who is elected by their peers and one person who is selected by the board in an effort to try to reach that demographic of students that school does not work for, because that voice would be very powerful at this table. And that voice would really shift and change the goals of the district, the goals of the superintendent, how we may move in policy or procedure. And that student is not likely to run for a campaign.
So I'm wondering if there's a way we can craft the criteria, because the other side of the coin, which I can argue both sides, is having two very articulate, passionate people who can reach back to those students who may not be well represented could be another avenue, so that the criteria for the student sitting at the table is, how are you going to reach your constituency, even those that you wouldn't necessarily sit with at lunch? And maybe that's a way to ask students to quote unquote campaign. What's the criteria that you're trying to campaign on? Right? I don't know if I'm really thinking out loud, which is always dangerous, but we've had students on the board who didn't really understand the position and were not successful at helping the board move the student position forward. And we've seen what success is. So how do we do both?
About 4 or 5 years ago, when we looked at how student representatives are elected to high school ASB, we looked at the rubric in the constitutional bylaws, and the rubric has been modified to be inclusive of some of the concerns we have. If it's 100% student vote, how's that going to trickle out? If we're really heavy and great in campaign, but our background or our knowledge or compassion isn't there, it becomes a really lopsided cabinet. So we looked at our constitutional bylaws, and then we've recreated the rubric, and it might look different now. I haven't seen it in a year or so, to balance for that. So the vote has a weight in it, but also your teacher input forms have a weight in it, and your responses to questions that might matter to the relevance to the position pull weight in it. So it's not so lopsided to your popularity or your ability to campaign really well. And it kind of gives a more representative view. Could be something worth looking at to see how that could integrate into this process.
Just so I understand what you're saying, it's not a ballot the way we vote for our elected officials where you just check a box next to a name. It's more like a rubric where you're saying, given a candidate, how do they score on on these fields that are important?
Good question. So it's a rubric of, out of 20 points, you can get 4 points for your responses to the questions. You can get 4 points for your campaign, and it's got a breakdown of a 4 would be, you got posters, you got people who have voted for you, you made buttons or whatever. So it's broken down up to 20 points. So if I'm not really feeling confident in campaign, I might rely on my other strengths and skills to score higher on the rubric. And then the vote by my peers is 1/5 of the total score as well. So it's part of it, but it's not a complete how I get elected.
So it's looking like Pro Bowl voting for the NFL. A third of it is popular vote, a third of it is player vote, and a third of it is executive vote. It's something like that. Yeah. Okay.
I'd be
Interesting.
curious to hear if, as our students on the board, do you have reflections on what's been shared in terms of whether you share or have an alternate perspective on these concerns and suggestions?
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to circle back to a conversation I believe we had. It might have been in the fall, I don't recall, but we discussed the title of this position, whether it would be a student board member or a student representative. And as a board, we decided on student representative, right? Because we felt this position is a representation of the student body. And I think a word that I tie with representation is election and democracy. And I think it's important to have an election, not just right now. I believe the discussion is between, it's already been decided that my position is going to be appointed this year. And then we're trying to revise how Katya's position is elected, which is currently through ASB, which is a narrower pool of students. So I think in order to truly have a true representation, it needs to be a vote from at least 7 through 12. And I think having that wider range of votes also narrows down the popularity contest, because I don't think every single student 7 through 12 is going to know one candidate that personal to be able to vote it on popularity. And I think they're gonna have to look further into what the criteria they're running on and what the beliefs and what they're gonna do within that position. So I think that's a better way to try to kind of steer away from that popularity contest. And I also trust our student body. I hope that students will represent someone who thinks are going to represent their beliefs and be able to make this district a better place. So I don't want to discredit our student body for them not being able to pick someone off who they think would be the best candidate, because I think that's in the best interest of our students.
I appreciate that, Audrey, because I forgot that Katya's position is only voted by ASB. So I would say that with enough runway, like I would be in support of it moving to that position being moved to a 7-12 vote. I'm also really interested in seeing the rubric that's used in ASB, because I think that that is also really helpful. Or 6-12. Thanks, John.
Well, we just got the ASB rubrics today in class. So they're split up into categories. And one of the categories is a self-evaluation where you'll rank yourself on topics such as public speaking, how well you can manage being an ASB officer and your grades, how well you are at running efficient meetings and things like that. And then you'll have a section that you give to teachers to evaluate you. So they look at you and you as a student don't see their evaluation of you, but Mr. Silva, our ASB chair, gets to see it and he looks at all that. And then he looks at the vote students did. So they get a Google form that has all the students running for exec ASB and their class ASB, and they pick the people they want. They rank them, and that goes into a portion of the voting. And then another section is we have to write about what we want to contribute to ASB, ideas we have, kind of just general as to why we want to be on ASB and want to be on the position. And I think having a packet like that might be a good way to kind of increase the span of what the students can do and like how they're elected, because we still get the students voting, but we also get to see other aspects, and they still have to like talk about the ideas they have and why they want to be on the board. And I think that might be a good way to replace like how the appointment is in a few years, because going down, it's kind of the same, but it'll be a good like transition, I think.
Yeah, I would agree that I think having a packet similar to the ASB would be better for the appointment role, but not for the elected role. Because I do actually have a few critiques of the packet for ASB. I think if we use a similar packet to ASB and don't revise it to fit the position of student representative, it kind of blurs that line between ASB and student representatives that we've kind of been wanting to like stray further away from. So there's more like distinguished roles. And I also think a few of the things like on the packet are talking about public speaking and like how well students are at running small groups. And I think that would kind of contradict our effort to, you know, reach students who aren't, I guess, having the system suit them as well. So I think that's something, I guess, maybe having a similar format to the ASB packet, but possibly revising it to fit the school board.
Well, and I do I hear you absolutely. And I do think that a leadership position does have certain roles. There is public speaking, there is being in a group, there might not be running groups, but, you know, and every, you know, leader has their strengths and has their opportunities. I think another thing to, you know, just put in the pot of things to think about is accessibility. You know, I just filled out forms for a conference today, and I always really appreciate when they ask about, you know, what do you need to make this, to make this experience as accessible as possible? So I think that can be part of that rubric for the kiddos to share. Like, what is it that I need? Where are what resources, what mentors, do I need help filling out the packet? You know, do I feel perfectly competent in one area, like Ms. Phillips said, but there are other areas that I feel like, well, maybe I don't qualify anymore. Like, how do I find out if I do? So thinking about not only the packet itself and the criteria itself, but what resources can we provide, what training, what instruction, what mentorship, what collaboration can we provide for students as they go through whatever process becomes the process.
I've definitely mentioned to our student reps and to John and Mr. Patton and Dr. Moshe that I am more than happy to help students fill out these packets. And I have time during the day to do that I could come in during lunchtime or whatever, if any student is interested, but the packet itself is a barrier, because that's absolutely a huge part of this. Is filling out a packet is a ton of work for some students.
I agree. And I think having us be accessible as well. Like, there's times when I'm accessible as well. And, you know, we each have, you know, different and similar skill sets. We also each have, you know, different and similar social capacities in the schools. Like lots of kiddos at the high school don't know me. And so whether or not they would feel comfortable and safe coming to me with those questions about, am I good enough to do this thing? Which is really kind of what it boils down to. So how do we find resources and mentorship and leadership from older students?
So,
You know, how do we build that into the system so that a kiddo doesn't have to try to come to a stranger with some of those questions?
I wonder, I would just wonder from the two of you, is this role, now that you've been in it, what you thought it was before you sat in the seat? And if not, how do we kind of put into words what it is so that when students take up the idea that they want to do it, they kind of know what they're getting themselves into? So is it what you thought it was going to be?
No, yes, it's not what I expected. I think I definitely saw just like being able, I think I saw it more as a way to like voice opinions of the students, which it is, but I don't think I saw as well, like as much as how much collaboration and how much like we're involved in certain decisions it is. And also like, I also didn't see the part of it we're like speaking to legislators or like the Washington State Student Representative Network, which is also a really big part of the position where we just talk to other student representatives. So I also didn't see that aspect. I think accessibility is something we should even discuss for this spring and talking about the appointment packets. Because I remember I decided last minute kind of to apply for this position. I was like, okay, well, you know, this is something I'm really interested in. And I truly believe that we need more student voice at the board level and like something I'm super passionate about. And I remember filling out my application packet and there's a few things I was struggling on. I was like, what exactly does a resume require? So like, there's a lot of questions I had. So I think just being able to really file that down and be able to figure out where these barriers are to make the packet more accessible. And then also, right, being able to kind of promote this. So the entire student body knows about this position. It's not just like something that might be on like our really great Instagram account or like the school website, but really just like getting it out to the entire student body.
I wonder if one next step might be to create a smaller task force that really spend some time collaborating around what the appointment packet process looks like and make sure that the questions are the questions we want to ask, that the information is the information we want to present, and that the distribution method and recruitment practices are really going to bring in the candidates that we'd like to attract. And then have that be a small enough subset of us that we could meet offline and move it forward. And then I wonder if we might also have a similar task force that is taking a longer look at designing a student body election process for a year and a half from now for the second position, just to make sure that we're not up against a clock problem when that rolls around again.
I think that's a great idea. And I think that it could potentially be the same group. They just have an urgent deadline coming up very soon. And at the same time, or perhaps immediately after, can roll into the next process.
Yeah, I think that might work well. And I would love to see you two think and reflect on whether you have time to be part of a process like that, or if there's a different student you might recommend participate.
I wonder if that could also be brought into our mentor meetings, since we already have a set time that we meet, if we can just add this on as a topic of discussion and kind of go through the packet and figure out the questions that we really want to be asking.
I'm thinking that same thing so that it's not another meeting. And I'd be happy to join, and I'd likely get at least Mr. Patton in the room so that we can have a full picture of what the possibilities are.
But we're doing those via Zoom right now because it's in the evening, because that's the only time we can actually meet because of sports and such. So, but yeah, I think that would be I think that's a great idea to roll that in and bring that together to really focus on getting that packet working for this year and then the process for next year. I think that's a fantastic way to do it. So we don't have to continue discussing it in full group.
Agreed. And will you please remind me what the timetable is for this year?
We will be getting a new position posted in early May and making our selection at the May business meeting is my recollection. I can get the details to you for sure, but that's my recollection.
Okay,
So
so,
we have a month and a half.
okay, but realistically, we have a month because
Mhm.
we meet with the students on a monthly cadence, and 2 months from now would be too late.
Yep.
May I ask if there would be an opportunity for another board member to see the revised packet before it gets posted to students in May?
Yeah, I think it, I'm just trying to think through the public records issues here. I don't think there's a problem if a small group creates it, passes it. No, we can't get comments that way.
No, you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
What you want to do is have the small group created and then the whole board review it.
Yeah. Yeah, and that can be at our next workshop.
That'd be great. If there's time, if it works out for there to be a discussion at the next workshop, it would just be great to feel like we all understood what we were sharing with students. Thanks.
And yeah, that would give us plenty of time. Yeah.
Just to make sure I'm clear on the dates. So we're going to do interviews on the workshop of May.
I don't have, I don't have my information, my,
But there's only one
Calendar
June
here,
meeting.
yeah.
I
It-
recall because I brought Dylan like 2 hours old and he was born early June. So I believe we typically do it the
Well,
June
The
meeting.
June meeting will be a workshop and a business meeting combined on the 14th, I believe. Is that the right date?
I think so, yes.
So you can do it all at once that night if you prefer.
I'm just checking right now where the,
We might have made an
Dates are.
exception that time. It's just I think we usually do it in May normally because of the fact that sometimes right after school ends,
Yeah.
everyone's out.
that's my understanding. That's my recollection as well, is that we have done it late a few times, but the policies previously, I don't think it has a date now, but previously the policy of the procedure said May. Yeah.
And
So
we've done sometimes the workshop or we've done the meeting. So if we want to shoot for the workshop and doing the interviews for the workshop,
it has to be a meeting so we can take a vote unless we call a meeting to order, a business meeting to order within the workshop, which we could do also. Let's look at the schedules of what is in each of those meetings and load balance based on that. Yeah, because I don't remember exactly what's in each of those meetings off the top of my head. I've got the list in my email, but
Brooke, since you're both our meeting chair and on that student advisor small group, I think you'd be best positioned to just make a recommendation around dates, and I would just trust you to do that. Great, thanks.
done. So we'll do during our next mentorship meeting, we'll look over that packet and shift things as necessary and then bring it back to the board at an appropriate time between then and when we need to get it out to students.
Much obliged. Thank you.
Another thing I think would be great to see for this appointment process is when we have interviews for our candidates involving students from different grade levels and granting them the opportunity to ask a question of the different candidates. So we truly involve students in the process of appointment, although it's not a student vote for the position, but students are involved in the process of interviewing and asking questions that relate to the position.
If we can get students here to do that, I would love to. The problem is you're all terribly busy and so are the parents. And so it's hard getting students here. But if we can get students here to ask those questions, I'm all for it.
And that might give us a reason to lean towards having it be in a workshop format.
Here we go. March. I don't actually see it on there. Yeah, and we've actually swapped around our yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, typically my calendar has been for the beginning of April to give the students a month to apply so that they have, because usually the applications go to Principal Patton first to make his recommendations, and then they come to the board. So if we're going to change all this up, we just need, we're coming close on time, especially with spring break around the corner.
That's what I was thinking, Christy. I was thinking that 2 weeks is too short because we usually have it open longer.
Here, I'm just looking at what we've got on the June workshop and business meeting to see if we can shift it there. That would be June 14th, which is 4 days after high school graduation, which doesn't matter because the graduating seniors wouldn't be doing that anyhow, and we don't have any senior members of our board members here, student board representatives. Let's take a look at that, and I don't think we need to make that decision right here and now, but I will take a look at that and see whether that May business meeting or the June combined meeting works best for getting stuff out and getting students involved. And we will be trusting to y'all to be talking up the positions within the schools as well. You've provided a great example for them of what this position can be. Now we just got to get someone else to carry it on. We also had discussion of avoiding burnout and rewarding participation. Thoughts on?
Before we move on, just
Yeah.
one last thing on the previous topic. So the student rep election, selection, appointment process, that is procedure, right? Not policy.
Correct. Our
Okay.
policy just says that we will have two and we will appoint annually.
Okay. So the committee can send recommendations to Dr. Moshe, who can amend procedure.
Correct.
And that can happen anytime.
Correct.
And on a related topic, I hope the procedure addresses whether or not a serving board member can run for reelection. Sorry, yes, a serving student representative.
I think it is currently not addressed in any way, shape, or form, whether positively or negatively.
Probably means if it's not forbidden, then it's allowed.
It could theoretically be allowed, assuming they came on the board as a freshman or sophomore.
Fair enough. I don't need to go down that rabbit hole, just curious.
Yep. Okay. Rewarding participation. I'm going to be looking at our student reps here about this. Is what matters to y'all for being rewarded for all the help that you're giving us? Is it that credit to talk to with Mr. Patton? Is it?
Brooke, could I suggest a word change?
Yes.
Compensated for participation.
Yes. Thank you very much. Compensated, since there is a lot of work that goes into it. And reward is something that is bestowed rather than earned.
Honestly, for me, it's like difficult, to talk about it as like being rewarded or compensated, because I think just the educational experience of it has been so rewarding. Like this is, like Joe mentioned earlier, this is the best decision I've ever made to run and for this position. But I do think having like an extra credit or volunteer hours would be nice as well. So.
I'm sorry, Dr. Moshe.
I just think the caliber of what we've seen from our students and the time they put in, if we formalized that, it could be a choice too. I don't know. Again, I would want to really talk with Mr. Patton and the students to find out what would be most valuable to them. But we have talked about it could be a CWP project, or it could be, if there happened to be an AP US history, could it be something in that? Could it be its own independent study? So I think there are ways to do it that will probably require a policy, or at least a modification of credit or something formal, but it could also be a little bit of choice.
I'm not sure if our policy, if it's policy or procedure, but one of them calls out a half credit independent study, I believe, yeah.
Opportunity, right, for half credit. But those independent study things are again, more time for the students. So John, can you help me out?
Yeah, and I talked to Katya a little bit about this morning. There's, I think, a few different options. It could be a 0.5 each semester of credit, and it could be, the title could be civics. Also, I think in the past, we've done an honors designation for US history. We could also do an honors designation for CWP when they're seniors. And it wouldn't matter if they were sophomores and juniors. Seniors take CWP, but by the time they get to be seniors, we can still put that honors designation on there. So there's some different options.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we want to talk about is how to provide time, right? So if it's an actual course, could it replace something or replace an assignment in a course or something? So I think we need more time to sit and talk about the possibilities and the reality of what can happen.
And quite honestly, the high school principal and the student representatives know what is most reasonable and most applicable and most desirous better than we do. So I'm entirely comfortable leaving it up to y'all to provide a recommendation for what should be in that policy.
And the other thing too is both of our student rep are great examples of they take rigorous courses, and they take, there's not a lot of room sometimes in their schedule, but what's really could work too is that our 3A, 3B, where maybe you have 3A band and 3B could be that civics class as a board rep, and it can be done independent study under some tutelage of some other teachers too. So another option.
Currently, I have an independent study period, and sometimes I'm able to finish my work early or just switch around when I need to work on certain days. And I'll use that time to go and work on our board presentations, or I'll look at board policy and things like that. And having that time is really nice. Like Dr. Moshe said, just being able to have a time in school to focus on the board, but also having another class, it works out really well with how the schedule is.
And theoretically, that would help with the burnout issue as well.
I think also leaving the door open for it to be offered as a 0 credit hour course would be beneficial, and maybe attracting some students who might need some credit retrieval that might be really activated by this position and would also serve them too.
I was just going to say that it is currently in the procedure, not the policy, the 0.5 credit, these choices. So it sounds like this can just be updated, as you see fit.
I think allowing for the flexibility depending on the student is probably where we need to head. And that could be the discussion of, what is I just don't think students know going in as much as they know coming out of how it would help them.
I think what might be supportive would just be more discussion of the options early and then mid board service, so that you're fully aware of your choices around how best to make this enhance rather than detract from your education and your burnout. Detract from rather than enhance your burnout. And I would also just recommend that we be really clear with students about how these volunteer hours can count towards the volunteerism that's required in other courses, so that nobody misses the chance to count this volunteerism towards, I believe it's a requirement in CWP to do some kind of community service. And of course, it's great if you also love volunteering, at a soup kitchen or an animal shelter, but if you don't have time for both, it would be a shame for any student to feel like this wasn't volunteerism or that they somehow had an unmet need.
Absolutely. I think the idea of a independent study to focus on board work is an excellent idea, because it also allows us to visit other campuses where we can't visit during a regular school day, and we'd have to worry about missing class. But having that designated time not only allows us to work on board reports, but also being able to connect with students at other grade levels. One thing, I feel like I'm playing the devil's advocate a little bit here, but one thing I think to point out about volunteer hours and credits is I don't think the idea of a reward should be that focused on too much, because I think it kind of lose the idea. And I wouldn't want someone to just run for this position. They're like, oh, I can just get a crazy amount of volunteer hours, or, oh, I can get this extra credit to put on my college app. But I think really focusing on the experience that comes from this position.
That's an important point. Thank you.
It sounds like we're hearing a lot of good ideas that sort of come at the intersection of compensation, burnout, removal, and then with the guardrails of, not juicing it so it creates perverse incentives to run. So it seems like the group, the aforementioned group, sounds like they've got enough to go on right now.
I also want to remind the students that in the past, the board and the superintendent will write recommendation letters that are very helpful for your college applications. And that's something that you want to take advantage of.
Assuming you don't already have everyone lined up.
They're juniors.
I know.
And assuming that you want to pursue college after graduation.
Thank you. Yes. Anything else to discuss on the topic of student board members? Anything that community members, that administrators, that student reps, that board members have to add to this? Anything we have online?
Nope, but I'll just pause a sec and see if anyone types something in.
If you are watching online and have something to add, please just type in your name and location in the Q&A just to let us know that you have something to say, and then start typing what you actually have to say.
Still nothing from Zoom.
I'm going to try to give it one full minute. I saw there were about six people, just to note that for anyone who's watching later on YouTube.
It'd be dated if one of us started singing the do 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 do.
Yes, there are 3 or 4 different hosts. All right, I think that means we can move on. Thank you all for the discussion. Thank you for the input. And I think that we've got some good things we can move forward on. We'll look at that appointment packet and date. The date we'll look at tomorrow. And then the packet we'll look at next time that the mentorship group meets. All right, we can move on to policy. I'm going to hand the mic metaphorically over to Director Downs.
We have a lot of policies tonight, just as we're ready. So the first one up is a change to our current policy. It's marked as essential. Third time we have looked at it. So I will just open it up to the board directors and see if there is any. Go ahead, Dr. Moshe.
The board at the last meeting asked me to get legal counsel on this particular policy, and I did. And our attorney believes it's perfectly fine to leave that portion out of the policy regarding the physical discipline of a child. The situation is quite nuanced, he says, and as such, I think it's fine to omit that portion because I'd rather have staff err on the side of reporting.
Mm-hmm.
So he concurs with the board's general sentiment.
Any discussion?
I'm glad that is legally sound. I agree with the lawyer. That was one of my concerns as well. And I feel that we should strike physical discipline of a child, the entire sentence.
And theoretically keep in some of those lettered points. We're particularly looking at D and G that were pulled.
To be honest, I can't remember. I'm just thinking about the sentence. It's hard to read in the red line, but it starts with physical discipline of a child, and it's all one sentence. So it would just be to the next period.
Yep. Yes. I would also recommend just leaving in as much language that protects our right to report concerning evidence as legally permissible.
Christy, item A there should be removed. That whole A, B, all of that is what they're saying they don't want in.
Yeah. The whole,
The whole thing from physical discipline through there. Yeah, just take it all out.
Or at least those changes.
yep, including,
Well, no, we want to keep some of that.
I think what we are, Christy, what we're trying to articulate is that we want to leave the language that defines what physical discipline is and remove the language around, I believe there was a comment in there somewhere about like, unless it's like what is permissible.
I don't think so.
Was that a different one?
I beg to differ. I think the board at the last meeting talked about taking it out completely because the statement is physical discipline of a child, including the reasonable use of corporal punishment, is not considered abuse when is reasonable and moderate. And that was the concern, is that somebody has to judge whether or not it's reasonable and moderate. So taking it out completely frees up mandated reporters to report whether or not it ends up being parent discipline.
I followed up with Brooke and I did miss the last meeting, but my understanding was we wanted to remove the line of reasonable use of corporal punishment is not considered abuse when it is reasonable and moderate, and leave the rest.
Yeah, that was my understanding as well. So Christy, could you undo the deletion that you just made? And so it's actually putting back in everything, everything from A through E, I think it is, that was removed, and removing the additions. Is that what we were
yeah,
talking
that
about?
sounds more like what I remember discussing. Leaving all of these various ways that potential abuse could be flagged and reported.
Mhm. Yeah, so basically refusing the changes to that section, but accepting them in the rest of the document.
That sounds correct.
Joe, would that require us to go back to our attorney?
No.
Okay.
It would not.
And
Yeah, basically, I forget the technical term for whatever word says, but refusing those changes,
Right, reject
reject those changes, and then leave what's been there in A through
Yeah.
Yes.
the only other part, and again, I recognize I haven't been part of these discussions, is the rest of it, it removes the word exploitation. I'm not entirely sure why. But I would advocate leaving exploitation.
I would
in
agree.
The policy. Joe or Christy, are we aware of why they're removing that word?
We are not aware of why they're changing this at all. So that was a piece of it, and why I went to our attorney on it, because you can probably leave the policy as is and still meet the requirement.
Okay.
You can just leave it as is and take it off the table as a potential change.
Perhaps we might consider bringing this back to workshop at another time, like over the summer, as a fresh look at an unedited policy, and then make it read how we think it ought to read.
Yeah, so basically not updated at this point, but bring it back
Right,
when we
during one
got
of our more
August or
spacious-
whatever.
Yes.
Postpone until August?
Yes, although we don't have to do that since it's not, we're not doing Robert's rules right now.
Okay,
But yes.
that's right.
And then I think that's a fantastic idea to take their suggestions, like make all of the changes in one document and then have the unedited version so we can compare them and make the changes we want to make.
I mean,
that what you're-
frankly, we could just each do our homework and read what they're recommending and then come in and
Yeah.
recommend it if we think it's advisable.
Yeah.
As opposed to comparing side by side, we could just come prepared to discuss
Yeah.
what changes we recommend
Yeah.
based on what we've learned.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes.
Mhm. Right.
Yes, thank you.
So we will just not bring this up at the business meeting. So we won't vote on it. We will not change it at this time. And then in August, when we have some bandwidth, we'll bring it up again and do a deep dive on it. Yeah.
Dr. Downs, does that suit your taste?
Well, we can absolutely do that. I don't know that there's a need to, because it sounds like we just like the old policy.
Well,
And we could just,
You can just table it.
It's also a good idea just to review the policy,
Yeah.
just to make
If-
sure we like it.
For informational purposes, the WAC that this is trying to encapsulate is 110-30-0030. And it actually continues to say exploitation, physical abuse, striking a child, shaking a child. So if you review that, I think your current policy suits it.
Mhm.
I'm just noticing we are going to want to make some changes to this eventually. It says he or she a couple of times. So we'll want to make at least some changes to it.
Right. Perhaps we just let it come up in the natural course of events when it does come up in our coming through of
Yeah.
policies.
That
Yeah.
would be now.
Oh,
Well, I think what Marnie was mentioning was occasionally when we have those lulls, we bring up
I-
some things that need minor
Okay,
tweaks. But yeah,
so in the efforts of, we're coming up on 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Here's what I would recommend. I would recommend we revert it back to the old policy. We switch the he's and she's to theys, and we move forward with it. It's grounded in the WAC. We don't like the changes that WASDA is recommending. And then if we want to circle back to it next year, we can.
I like that approach.
Or in August. If you think about it in August and say, hey, I want to pull that policy, we can.
let's do it.
To confirm, you want me to change all the he's and she's to theys?
Keep the
bring
old
it back
policy.
To the meeting.
Mhm.
And that's the only change we're going to bring to the
Yes.
meeting, the
Yep.
next one.
Yep.
Got it.
Yes. Thank you, Christy.
Thank you.
And check for parent guardian
Yes.
and will shall.
Yeah.
No, all right.
I'm willing to let that one slide.
All right. Thank you. Thanks,
All
Christy.
right. Conflicts of interest. Any discussion, any thoughts?
This one's pretty straightforward. It lays out what we can and can't do, and there's not a whole lot to change on that since it's all based in.
You do need to omit G and H because we are not that district. So that's why that's in green to be removed.
Mhm.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chrissy.
Going to pull this up on my phone so that I have a screen I can scroll up and down onto. Just
Oh, I'm never this with it. Well done. It's a hot mess. To the thing. On it. On it.
Having a little technical difficulty.
Christy, just a question. Are we coming back to financial education or are we? Sorry. Yeah, we'll come back to it. Okay. Okay, students in or released from institutional education facility. Any questions, discussions around this one?
Director Jones, this seems like an area of your particular expertise. So I just wanted to get your general read on the policy.
General read, I think it's solid. A lot of times what we have is that students will either be at an out of state or at the minimum out of district placement, and therefore they will be under different credit requirements, different pieces that can create barriers for students. Especially if you're looking at any sort of long-term facility. So it's in the benefit to waive and to work with the student to work towards graduation.
I had one wording thing is in that first paragraph, it says dismal graduation and recidivism rates. And that seems to be putting a judgmental tone to something. that is-
The current graduation rates for students in institutional education facilities are 3%.
Oh, I don't disagree that it is a very low number and it should not be. It just feels like it feels like the policy could be, it feels judgmental to me, the dismal word.
It is
I offer
judgmental
another-
because the judgment is they are not graduating when they're in
Yes. Can
institutions.
I offer a perspective that my heart soared when I read that, and I thought finally some honest language about a life altering impact. And it helped me feel like these policies are actually tied to how our students feel and experience life. And I liked the emotional honesty of that word.
I appreciate the viewpoint and withdraw the comment.
All right.
And then I don't know how to handle this, but down at the bottom, these cross-referenced policies, they don't exist in our policy book yet.
Is it the green highlighted ones?
Correct.
I would remove them then. My advice.
I would agree if they do not exist, we should remove them.
Yes, although I believe they are also mentioned in the text of the policy. The district will award blah, 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 according to the board's mastery-based credit policies cross-referenced below. So we would need to do something with that sentence as well. It's right where the cursor is on the screen.
Yeah, that first 3 sentences of that paragraph.
Christy, if you could highlight the prior 2 sentences as well for removal. Thank you.
I don't know that we need to I'm just rereading it. I don't know that we need to tweak the first 2 because it's talking about if they have access to it.
Yeah, my understanding is the idea is that students can take these tests to show proficiency as opposed to having to retake classes.
It might just be
Oh,
I
the district
understood.
will
I read it.
award mastery-based credit according to as appropriate rather than according to whatever.
Oh, of course. Yeah, I'm rereading it now and seeing it's referencing students where they have had access to those opportunities, not within
Yeah.
our district.
Yeah.
Yes,
Just-
I retract my suggestion.
Well, but the comment about referring to the policies, if we just change from, yeah, exactly,
So
as
what-
appropriate.
What that's speaking to is the majority of institutional system or facilities within the state of Washington are currently run by ESDs, and ESDs are non-educational agencies. And so they are not able to provide credit. They can provide what's called seat hours. And so that's what it's speaking to, is that the students, when they leave, we send the district their seat hours, and then that is, the district then converts that into credits.
Thank you.
Or as broadly as appropriate to emphasize that we want to be giving these students.
As appropriate, it's
okay,
fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, because then that doesn't reference policies we don't have. Yeah.
Yeah, and then also strike the green cross-referenced policies.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, new policy, financial education mastery-based learning credit. So this is as a result of some WAC changes to graduation policy. Any discussion?
Do you want to make comments? John and Kayla have some comments.
Yeah, just real quickly with financial education, it is not a graduation requirement. We are required to offer a course or even standards. It could also be done in advisory assemblies, things like that. Right now at the high school, our merchandising marketing class, of course, is financial education. And also in our English 12, we have some consumer science, some financial things with budgeting. And also we have select students that take consumer math.
Oh, sorry, Kayla. I'm wondering if this could also lean into our student representatives, given their work with budget. Go ahead, Kayla.
High School and Beyond plan touches on some financial discussion. At the middle school level, we have a class called Financial Fitness, which this week they bought cars, which is really cool. So on Monday they got, their Ferraris. And then by Thursday, they were looking at interest rate and then their monthly payment, and they're all driving Subarus. So naturally. And so that class is offered right now to about half of the school. It's a super popular class and we're hoping to expand it. Just a matter of accessibility and offering it's available. So.
I know that this has been a topic that a lot of high schoolers have brought up just in general conversations and that they'd like to know more about, because a lot of them are going into whatever they choose to do beyond high school and have very little idea of how to do finance, money, taxes, anything in that sort of realm. So I think this is really important, and encouraging students to take those classes and offering more of them. And the middle school one sounds really fun. We should have that at the high school. So things like that students would really appreciate.
Yeah, I'd just like to say I'm so excited to see this policy being discussed, because I think financial literacy is such an important part of education, especially preparing students for a developing world and becoming these lifelong learners. It's important to understand how to finance and better understand the economy. I also think it's an important skill to learn now, as a lot of students here are employed. I think Katya and I both got W-2s a few weeks ago, and I'm like, what do I even do with that? So just like being able to understand, how to operate finances. And it can also kind of alleviate barriers for students who are employed and are in school by understand how to finance as well.
+1 to all the enthusiasm around this policy. 2 questions. First one, in the second to last paragraph, as described in the procedures, do we have procedures? If not, would this necessitate creating them?
We don't have a policy, so we don't have procedures. yet.
Okay, so there would be a new accompanying procedure. Okay.
Yes, and this is a draft.
Okay, excellent. And then in the last paragraph, there is something about the district will collect and annually review disaggregated data, et cetera. That statement is very broad, and I would love to see more disaggregated data to see whether traditionally marginalized subgroups are receiving credit and not. I'm curious if perhaps that should be narrowed to the scope of this policy by adding mastery-based financial literacy credit or something to keep it on topic.
I'm not sure why it's only in this policy, and if it's something the board wants in terms of disaggregated data, this is very specific. So I agree with you. I think that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. Let me rephrase it. Let's do one of 2 things. 1, let's keep it broad and move it where it belongs. Or 2, let's narrow it to the scope of financial literacy.
So just to kind of piggyback on this, we've done what we don't call it mastery-based credit. We call it proficiency-based credit at the high school, and there's an opportunity. And I just want you to know the N for that data is going to be very, very low. We maybe have one, maybe two a year. So it really won't be an opportunity to break it down.
Yeah, it doesn't say anything about presenting it in a public meeting. It just says review it. So yeah, I think that's okay.
And I know that Mr. Pullman does review a lot of that disaggregated data, I assume with the other administrators as well on a yearly basis. Not necessarily for this, but in
Mr.
general.
Patton or Mr. Pullman?
Mr. Pullman, is my understanding, does that for other issues, but yeah, not for
Yeah.
this one in particular. Yeah.
He does it for
Yeah.
hiring and so on. John does it for grades and
Got it.
class selections and
So lots of people doing that already.
Yeah.
To Joe's point, that might be something to consider as a broad-based policy, just to maybe looking at as part of our equity policy of, I think it's in there.
probably in
It
there.
I think
is.
it's in
It
there,
is
yeah.
in the equity
So we,
policy.
we
so
already,
We're good.
yes, look for disproportionality based on that policy, which is the very broad policy. So I just don't know if you need it here as well.
If it's covered elsewhere broadly, then I think we could probably strike it.
I would agree.
Excellent. Yeah, I knew we were doing it. I just didn't know where it was in the policy.
Sorry, in the online version that's linked from tonight's agenda, there were some weird typographical characters, but I'm not seeing them here. So I don't know what they were or where they came from, but I don't think they're going to be a problem. They were like weird little floral ampersands.
The hibiscus flower is making its comeback. Yep. Let's do searches and personal property. All right, changing the title, adding a little bit of language. Any discussion on this one?
Good catch with the End Guardians. I don't know if that was you, Ms. Macaro, or if it was WASDA, but no, I think these are all good changes.
Agreed.
Is there more beneath all the cross references? Okay, yeah, this part confused me. A whole bunch of stuff is being stricken, and a lot of it seems to outline students' rights to some guardrails around searches, invasive bodily searches, and perhaps those are outlined elsewhere, like in the law, which is probably the appropriate place for them. But I just want to make sure this change is not taking away rights from students.
So I think one of the pieces and the nature of how schools operate currently is we have to keep all students safe. And the typical rule of thumb, as I have always communicated it, is when you're on school property or you're using a school property device, it is school property. So locker, school property. And we do have to do physical searches on kids now. And that can occur in a variety of places. And that's just unfortunately the landscape of our educational environment.
We have procedures around this that we follow.
Yep.
And you can certainly call on our principals if you want to know how they conduct searches. So.
All right, as long as guardrails are in place elsewhere, then I'm fine with
Well,
that.
typically, we don't typically actually physically touch a student. They are called upon to empty their pockets, and it's very clear to students, hopefully, that lockers are owned by the district and so on. There's always a second person. And And if a student refuses, then they're insubordinate. So for example, if you say empty all of your pockets and they don't, then they're insubordinate, and then it's assumed guilt. It's like refusing a breathalyzer, right? So again, it's a process that we're familiar with.
Thank you for the question. I appreciate your close reading.
I'm particularly interested if our student reps have any input on this one, since it is directly impacting students and student rights.
I don't have anything to add at the moment. Thank you.
I think whatever keeps our school and community the safest is what we need to consider.
Thank you.
All right. Infection control. We are adding one section. Discussion.
Can't imagine something like this ever happening, can you?
Why no?
Last time this policy came up for review, I was very new in my tenure, and I made some pretty ham-fisted attempts to modify the policy, but this is the right way to do it. So I'm glad this wording's being inserted.
All right. Thanks, Christy. Duties of board members.
Just a reminder, this is completely discretionary.
Taking Brooke's title away.
I think we should consider sofa.
Sofa. The Chase Lounge.
I'm all there for that.
Any discussion on this one? This is a policy. Oh, sorry, Joe. This is a policy at some points that we do sometimes have to like look at if, you know, you have a board member like me who missed 2 meetings in a row or whatnot. So it is an opportunity to look at what does it say in terms of our expectations.
I believe the wording had something to do with like inexplicably missed or something like that. Like we knew why you weren't there.
Oh,
You
no.
weren't just like MIA.
I know I'm not in trouble. You are welcome to excuse me from the board so I can have my Wednesdays back.
So this makes some pretty sweeping changes. I just want to make sure everybody saw this. It does away with the WIA rep,
Yeah.
policy rep, and it narrows the scope of the vice chair's responsibilities. So yeah, there's a lot in here that I
Just for the board's information, I believe like the policy rep was a South Whidbey edition to begin with. The WIAA rep surprised me, but so again, it's your choice how you want to operate in this one. That's what I mean by discretionary. You know, it's discretionary. You can do or not do any and all.
I don't see a need to make these changes, quite honestly. I like having a designated policy rep, and I like having a WIA rep, and yeah, I mean,
I like having more jobs to do than just sitting around until you're gone.
yeah,
Brooke likes his title.
yeah.
I think there is some good, there's some good stuff in here that we might want to keep, but I think similar to what we were talking about with the, what was it,
The protect
the abuse
against
and
abuse.
yeah.
Mhm.
It seems like maybe better to start from what we've got and then consider additions instead of trying to pick and choose from the WASDA suggestions.
Yeah, and this changes the ledge rep to a 2-year term and yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good, so are there any good things from in here that folks would like to make the changes?
I like the they thems and the yeah. The will shalls.
There's something down near the bottom about the individual members not having authority, the authority resting in the board. I mean, I knew that to be true. I don't know if this paragraph makes it any more or less true. I think it's just kind of how it works, but perhaps it's good to be explicit about it. So that's the one part I do like.
Well, and that's not an addition.
No, that was previously on
Yeah.
it.
Oh, sorry. I thought, okay, never mind. I see. Pink means existing.
So Christy, what I think we're saying is we're going to leave this one alone and not accept WASBA's changes.
Yeah. Right.
Yep.
Right.
And when we do review it next, so the green italics was a suggestion I made. I just noticed that this policy is called duties of a board member, and it makes 0 mentions of student outcomes, which I would consider my number 1 duty as a board member. And so I just want to make sure we make that clear.
What's interesting is that it doesn't call out what the actual duties of the board members are, which is your fiscal responsibility and the supervision of the superintendent.
You're right. Yeah. So there are more things that are missing in addition. And so, yeah, but things to add.
So would we like to add a paragraph at the beginning that actually goes into the details of the duties of a board member as we see it here in South Whitby?
I think we could just put in what Joe said because that is our purview.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. But to add in the fiscal
Mhm.
and supervision, fiscal oversight and supervision of the superintendent.
Maybe
Agreed.
it's something about they do this through monitoring the district's fiscal responsibility and providing direction to the super. I don't know the exact.
I think it
wording,
would be to
I'm sorry, this is duties of individual board members,
yes,
not the
right, not to
duties
the
of the
board. Yep.
board.
Yep, you're right. Yeah. That is a good point.
Okay, so never mind, Chrissy.
Yeah.
I would suggest that for the policies that you're not changing, that we do add the date of review
Yes.
so that it doesn't look like the policy hasn't been updated since whatever.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that's a good point, that this is the duties of an individual board member rather than the board as a whole. So-
Correct, Christy.
yeah.
Yes.
I may ask that we bring this back at another time, but not in this season when we have a lot on our agenda. And I can do that at another time.
Marnie. So I'm going to talk about your role.
I'm super excited about this one.
Do you want to introduce it?
Sure.
All right.
So I think that last week was a great example of how our legislator program can function. And I really like that this explicates specific duties of the role I hold, as well as opportunities before the whole board, which I would believe includes our student representatives as well as our elected board members and our superintendent. And so I just feel excited about clarifying and outlining the opportunities in front of us. And I'm happily excited to step into some of the more specific duties of my role through this policy.
So the one green piece would be the 2-year period. We currently operate from a 1-year period. Is there any reason to change from 1 to 2 years?
I think the pros of a 2-year period is that it took me a year to even know what to notice about how to do this role. The con of a 2-year period would be that the board may be dissatisfied with the engagement or the curiosity of the legislative representative after that first year. But a representative could be asked to relinquish their position if they weren't interested in doing it differently or better.
The one negative beside that I see is it takes it out of the regular cycle with the other board roles. But that's just me liking things to happen all at the same time.
Frankly, I think any board worth its salt would notice if there was an opportunity to have a more suitable appointee in any role. So I don't think there's any harm in reviewing it annually and suggesting that the person best suited to the role step in.
I do like to give flexibility to future boards. We've stayed in the same roles for large part as long as I've been on the board, except when someone leaves the board. But other boards change every year, and I like giving the flexibility to future boards to change every year if they choose to.
All right. So Christy, let's strike that. Also, Marnie, I've written down 2 of your quotes so far tonight.
Oh, that's exciting. Thank you.
Most recently, dissatisfied with the curiosity of the board member. That was a great one. All right. Any other?
I think you should say the from among at the first regular meeting, or should I just reference 1210, which
From among its members at the annual reorganization meeting.
yeah, something like that.
Agreed.
Control Z. The arrow button does that? Oh, up at the top. Okay. 3 more. Audrey and Katya. What are your thoughts on this one? This is student on governing boards. So Audrey and Katya, what are your thoughts?
A comment is the change from required expected, are required to attend all meetings to are expected. I appreciate that as student athletes, students with other activities, not being able to always attend meetings. That's always nice to have. And I appreciate the addition of the advisory votes.
I'm just so excited to see the advisory votes on there because I know it's something the past student rep and I, Katya, have worked really hard to get. And I think it's such an important part of the position. So just being able to see that in policy makes me really happy. I also think the part about removing from required to expect is really important because I think that also kind of contributes to the burnout part and allowing, if a student needs to take a mental health break from a meeting, that's acceptable and not frowned upon.
I think all of those are really important. I love that we've got the advisory votes in policy. I have a wording thing in the first paragraph, rather than with other district students, for clarity's sake, maybe with other students in the district. Because the first time I read that, I thought it was students in other districts. Minor, but just for clarity's sake.
I think that does clarify it a little.
Would it be possible to possibly change the language on associated student body? Because I think that applies ASB, but making it more general to the entire. I know associated student body would apply to the entire student body, but I think it's tied to the term ASB.
Just pull associated. So it's just student body.
Yeah.
Okay, agreed.
So remove the word associated right where your cursor is. Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So since this is just a clarifying question, since it's not capitalized, is it trying to refer to the student body associated with that representative? Because some districts have like 2 high schools, or I don't know if that's what it's trying to get to, because ASB is usually capitalized. I mean, I don't have a care one way or the other.
I think that's probably exactly what it's referring to, but it doesn't matter for our district because we don't have that. So, yeah. Yep. Yep. And then up in the end of the first paragraph with students. Yep.
So my question to the students is, if you were to, if somebody's looking to become a student board representative, A, would this be helpful for them to kind of understand the policy behind what they're doing? And B, is this language accessible for those kiddos?
I think it is accessible language, especially once all the crosses out and red and that's all taken out. I think it is accessible language, and I do think it is helpful for incoming student reps to look at and read about and kind of get a basic understanding of what the position entails and kind of more of the policy side of things.
Yeah, I think it's also accessible language as well. One thing I would note is it mentions will not attend executive sessions, but I may be incorrect here, but I believe there's a few exceptions as if we're appointing a new board member, such as Director Greenherron.
Unless explicitly invited. Yeah. Yeah. Because you're right. There are some when we want you there.
I wonder if the last 2 sentences could be one sentence. The student representatives provide the board with advisory votes on agenda items as follows. Feels totally redundant and duplicative. So I think it could simply state immediately before the board votes on any agenda item, the student board representatives will each provide their advisory vote, whether pro, con, or abstain.
And I like adding each in there.
If I may, back to serve as liaison. I'm hoping that it can mean serve as liaison for the for all district students, not just
Right. For the full student body, or for
Yeah.
all district students might be an easier way to frame it.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's what associated student body is referring to in that point is the entirety of everyone. But we did pull associated because, to Audrey's point, that it feels like ASB. To simplify, it could just be serve as a liaison for every student in the district.
Or maybe simply the entire student body. I think this was probably written for larger districts with a representative from each high school.
I also really like abstain in there as a good reminder for when, say, the board chair forgets to remind the student representatives that they can abstain from a vote, an advisory vote.
All right. 2 more. Speaking of executive sessions. Really section A that we're considering.
It's just carving out another exception that we can use for executive sessions. Yeah.
Cyber safety.
So theoretically, if we wanted to bring in Mr. Turner to talk about cybersecurity at the district, we could do that in executive session so we weren't talking about our protections. That makes good sense.
The other question is, with the previous policy, we kept chair/president. So would we like to keep it for continuity in this one? Yes. So we accept A and we keep president. Last one. This one's an easy one. Oh, I lied. Second to last one. Any discussion?
I wonder about the inclusion of Indigenous Peoples' Day.
Anything you do here potentially has financial impact. So just, I would offer discretion.
Sure.
Indigenous Peoples' Day, if you are talking about the day after Thanksgiving, renaming it Indigenous Peoples' Day, is that what you mean?
I was thinking of the day in October that is recognized by some states and municipalities, but not by,
So we don't currently have that day off of work.
right?
Right, we have the Friday after Thanksgiving and it is called, what's it called? I'm sorry, I don't know off the top of my head. Yeah, but that particular day has a name in this state and it's a state holiday. And
So maybe we should just update that to the proper terminology for this state and note that it's the fourth Friday in November.
That would help me. And I also feel like I could bring back my suggestion regarding the October day next year with more of an informed position on what it would mean for the district.
Yeah, because
So-
basically, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, so just to clarify, like this is not just designating all holidays. This is saying these are the holidays we observe and do not operate.
Right. And I
it's Indigenous Peoples' Day is the day after Thanksgiving.
got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Sure. Changing the reference to the fourth Thursday, changing the reference to the day after Thanksgiving and titling it differently and referencing the fourth Friday in November would address my concern.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right. Now we're on to the, Oh.
Joe,
I was just going to say, I think it's called Native American Heritage Day, not Indigenous Peoples' Day. So we should just get the right name of the
Yeah,
day.
yeah.
The day after.
That sounds correct. I believe that Indigenous Peoples' Day is in October and it's not one of our holidays.
Friday,
that sounds
November 24, Native American Heritage Day. Yeah.
Thank you.
okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, this is on the wa.gov website.
So this last one here, temporary administrators, really what we're adding is with the sub shortage and needing people to help support the teaching workforce. They changed the laws around retire rehires. And so this is capturing that.
Right, we talked about, there was another policy about this
With
last
teaching.
workshop, I believe. Yeah,
yeah, it cross references that.
We would like this to happen,
yes.
right, Susie? You want a day off?
Thank you.
You want to take a nap? All right.
Okay.
Cool, we're done.
All right. Okay, this workshop is adjourned. Thank you very much. Good night.